Hi and welcome back to my channel. So today I'm doing a monthly wrap-up of all the books that I read in April. So the first book I read in April was Bridgerton 2, The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. And I guess most of you recognize the name Bridgerton from the Netflix TV series, but the TV series is based on a series of books. And I watched the first season on Netflix when it came out, but I didn't really like it that much, so I wasn't very tempted to pick up the books. And now when the second season came out on Netflix, I hadn't really planned on watching that either, but I kept seeing so much about it online and I got curious and I wanted to see what everyone else was watching. So I sort of gave in and watched it, and I actually liked it a lot more than the first season. So in the end I became curious about the books too, so I decided to pick up the second book. And now after reading it, I really feel like I shouldn't have bothered, because I feel like this is one of the rare cases when a TV series adaptation is a lot better than the book it's based on. That doesn't happen to me very often, but I really felt like that was the case this time. And like the basic story in both the book and the TV series is the same, but I just feel like they made some changes like to the story in the TV series adaptation that just made the whole story much better, and like those choices made so much more sense than the original story in the book. So for the few of you who don't know, Bridgerton is about one rich family, the Bridgertons, in the Regency era in England, and each book is about one of the siblings and their romance or love story. So the second book is about Anthony, who's the oldest sibling, and he starts to court one girl, but then sort of starts to falling in love with her sister, and the sister is not very fond of him. She does not like him at all. Yeah, so I'm not a romance reader. This is basically my first romance novel that I read. So I think that those of you who are into romance should take my opinion with a grain of salt. But I did not enjoy this book at all. I feel like some of the plot points are ridiculous. I feel like the basic story is quite good actually, and I think that the chemistry between the main characters is good as well. But the ridiculous plot points and the bad writing really ruins the book for me. So I would give it like 1.5 stars and just recommend you to watch the TV series instead. So next up is a fantasy classic, and it's The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. And I don't think I have to explain The Hobbit too much. I think most people know about it. And if you haven't read it, you've probably seen the movies. And I also made like a separate review of this book, so I will link to that like here or like in the description box. And this was actually my first time reading proper fantasy for adults, so I don't have too much to compare it to or anything really. But with that being said, I really enjoyed reading this book, and it really made me like interested in continuing reading fantasy and trying out different genres within fantasy. And it also inspired me to want to read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I've seen the movies many times, but I haven't read the books, so that's really something I want to do now. And this book was published in 1937, I believe, but I didn't feel like it was like outdated or too old. It was pretty fast-paced, to the point. It was very easy to follow along. So like to summarize, I think I would give this book like a 4-star, and I enjoyed it so much more than the movies, which I think is also a great note to give a book. So next up is a book by one of the great American authors, and that is A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. And I made a reading vlog about this book, so if you're interested in knowing more, I will link to that video. This is a memoir that Hemingway wrote towards the end of his life, and it's like each chapter is a separate story, but they are all about the time in the 1920s that he spent in Paris, working as an expat journalist. So the stories are about his work, his writing, about his personal life that he shared with his wife and kid. And some of the stories are about the famous people that he met in Paris, so like Gertrude Stein or the Fitzgeralds. And I only have great things to say about this book. I absolutely loved it. It's a 5-star for me. I enjoyed it so much. And it really made me interested in reading more Hemingway because I enjoyed his writing so much. I really felt like, when I was reading it, I felt like I was transported back to the 20s and to Paris. So I feel like this is a book that I will reread many times in my life. So last but not least is this book. It's The Dark Half by Stephen King. I know it says Stark here on the cover, and that's because I have a Swedish translation, and the translation was made by Roland Adlebert. It's important to mention the translators. I often forget that, but this time I remembered. And this is another first for me. This is my first time reading Stephen King, so that's very exciting. And I know that this is not one of Stephen King's more like famous books, so I'm not going to judge him as a writer based on this book, especially since I have a translation, so I don't think that's fair. I will judge him as a writer after I have read one of his books in English. So to give you an idea of what this book is about, I will read you the back. I will translate it. So Stark is dead. He was a writer. His brutal, ice-cold, bloody crime novels have sold in enormous quantities. Ted Beaumont is also a writer, very serious. His novels have received literary prizes and praise from critics, but they have not sold in many quantities. When it's getting hard for him to continue writing, he starts to write a whole new type of books under a pseudonym. And faced with a threat of extortion from a fanatic fan, Ted Beaumont decides to reveal that he's actually the author behind George Stark's books. And at the same time, he decides to kill off Stark to go back to writing his own novels. The joy of life for Ted flourishes, his family life flourishes, and he feels a joy to work for the first time in a long time. There's just one problem, and that's that George Stark does not seem to want to remain dead. And the unknown sadistic killer that's on the loose has the fingerprints of Ted Beaumont. So yeah, that's the plot of the book, and it was very interesting. It was a thriller with sort of elements of the supernatural, and that was the first time for me reading that type of book. I enjoyed it. I feel like it's a good book. It's not a great book. It's like a 2.5, 3-star book, like enjoyable but not great. And I feel like maybe I would have liked it more if it was a thriller without the supernatural elements, but that's just my preference. And there was, like, I know that Stephen King can be very like gory, and there are some like descriptions of violence that's very gory in this book, but those passages are very short and quite few. So I wanted to read like some other Stephen King books that are like more like horror books to really like see what a gory Stephen King book is like. So even though I didn't feel like this was a great book, I'm still very interested in reading more Stephen King, and I wanted to read like the books that he's really well known for. So all in all, I think it was a great experience, and I will continue reading Stephen King, that's for sure. So those are all the books that I finished in April. I do have a few books that are like in progress, but I will talk about those in a later video. I feel like this will be way too long if I start talking about those books as well, so that will come in a separate video later. So I want to say thank you so much for watching today's wrap up, and see you next time.